if a person's confused, the first logical piece of information they hear after being confused will be automatically accepted.
Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, understood this long before social media or surveillance capitalism. He wrote extensively about a method now known as the Alice in Wonderland technique, which involves flooding the subject with contradictory messages, bizarre phrases, and emotional whiplash until their grip on reality begins to slip. In 1961, the CIA declassified the now infamous Covert Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual.
And L. Ron Hubbard openly wrote about this in his work, and I'll give you all of my research on it, and then the CIA, without even attributing anything to him, copied it almost word for word in an interrogation manual. And in conversations you can do this to people where it's like a super fun thing, then really depressing or scary thing, fun thing, scary thing. Scroll through your social media feed. Yeah, it's fractionation as well. If you think of the way that social media manipulates our brain, it falsifies tribal agreement and makes us say A.
Right.
So we're willing to ignore everything that we see because we're seeing a tribe say that something else is happening.
Okay.
So it overrides our brain.
At that breaking point, you stop critically thinking and start following. That's where the real manipulation begins. Confusion, pause, insertion. You've seen the scripts. You know nothing. The system is broken. Only we have the answer. It's the same message across 1,000 hustlers, each wearing the costume of authority. Fear, then hope, then guilt, then belonging, then fear again. It's not a side effect, it's the point.
It's the same thing with politics. You see the exact same thing. Identity gets hijacked, and then I can do anything I want, because your identity is involved here. It's not you're agreeing with my ideas. You're agreeing because it's who you are.
And the most important part, this didn't start on YouTube, or in a podcast, or with a guy selling alpha masculinity and sunglasses. Chase Hughes is clear. The psychological tools we're seeing today were forged in war rooms and interrogation chambers. And now the lab coat could just look like an influencer with a verified checkmark.
If I can get you to think that most of your tribal members agree to X, then most people, like 90% of people, will say, okay, X is true.
Well, especially with social media, right?
Scroll, swipe, pause, watch again.
Your brain versus a $1 trillion computer. You're going to lose. I'm going to lose. And I can spot all of the things, and I'm still going to lose. Tribal confusion. So I get to automatically, I don't have to hack your brain. I don't have to convince you of anything. All I have to do is tell you a whole shitload of people believe this one thing. Novelty generates focus. Then there's an authority because you're thinking a lot. This thing has 97,000 likes in the last hour or whatever. Authority. Tribe is there. It's built into the likes. If I've got you for 16 hours with advanced algorithms and technology designed to manipulate you specifically, and in 1972 they could talk someone into murder in 45 minutes. If you just imagine what's possible. If you're thinking it's a left and a right issue, that's also, you may be a victim.
It's September 2025. Now, in a previous video I had mentioned copycats, and I highlighted one individual who not only deliberately broke a temporary law, but had announced it to authority types that he was doing so. And this was really based on his trauma of the events that began in 2020 and everything that transpired afterwards. And now he's using something that has no relation to those events to make some sort of stand. And I've also highlighted, for example, how we see even mainstream media in other countries promoting the idea. And social media has just gone crazy with it, coming up with all these, as a descriptive, theories to include land grabs and everything else. Now, I'm not stating or implying that this land grab theory is or is not happening, or will happen, or will not happen. Perhaps whomever is taking advantage of an opportunity, and that's all that really is. But people connect the dots to see what they want to see. I've said repeatedly, people are not interested in what the truth is, but rather what they want the truth to be. And I'm going to tie all this into with the cycles of civilizations and the patterns within. But I want to expand on as a descriptive, the psychological part of this individual and people just like him. Because it does really appear that these events that took place or began in 2020 really traumatized many people. And now they're seeing, as a descriptive, ghosts, and seeing that everything now is either tied to the events that began in 2020 or the same. And they're making projections based on that. And a real big part of this is the psyop behind it all, literal psyop, and there are elements of a psyop. It's not just some word that's being thrown around by myself to, I don't know, encompass whatever. You have to look at the elements to understand what a psyop really is. And I've highlighted, for example, Chase Hughes, and he goes through these things in depth. And what we see happening in, for example, social media right now is the vilification of Canada as a whole, and we'll call it the agenda to break up Canada as a nation. What is being played on is the trauma that people had experienced in 2020, and it does appear many people, perhaps most people, cannot let go. And we still see people talking about those events and things that were being imposed and everything else to this day. And this whole thing with Canada, and I highlighted in a video how the stage is being set, for example, now with Canada and the Western provinces. It all began during the events that began in 2020. For example, with the so-called Convoy of Freedom, elevating the Western provinces to be rebellious and heroes and everything else. Heroes in the sense of the provinces being the heroes. And this is really being used against the people. And I'm going to segue just for a moment, and I've said this before many times, this type of thing is happening all around the world simultaneously, historically, current, and chances are in the future. And anyone who thinks that, oh, this is only focused on their own country, for example, in Canada, well, they've been psyoped. And if you cannot, for example, see anything wrong with the position that you're taking, and you can't see anything correct with opposing positions that you're taking, that means that you've been brainwashed heavily. And this individual who got this almost $29,000 ticket for going on a hike is a good example of someone brainwashed and they're not thinking clearly. And he even admitted the reason why he's doing this is because he missed the opportunity to get a ticket during the events that began in 2020, and now he's created this other thing. And the courts are not going to make that connection. They're not going to care. But now he has to defend himself on that ticket. And I also said that there's a possibility, if the authority types decide to, charge him with further peripheral charges related to that. This all ties in with the cycles of civilization and the patterns within. And I've explained these patterns within is what allows people to be able to, as a descriptive, project what's coming next. But most people can't grasp that, or they don't want to grasp that. They're emotion-based, they react emotionally. And we see, for example, Canada not only being broken up and divided, but we see, well, I'm going to pause here for a moment. Social media is the worst culprit for these psyops. People go into echo chamber groups and simply regurgitate everything that they've heard. And you can really tell this when, for example, someone gives a comment to a post that uses logic, and all they can do is give a laughing reaction to it. Or sometimes even people try to, well, basically what they're doing is regurgitating the echo chamber, but not addressing any of the points that may be listed. That right there tells you you're dealing with people who are completely brainwashed. But this ties into the cycles of civilization. And I've said we are in the late stage of the last stage of civilization, the age of decadence, again. And we repeat history because history is forgotten either by chance or design. Sometimes things are just forgotten as a, say, organically. People forget their own memories and stuff and replace them with false memories. And then we have the studies made famous by Julia Shaw playing a role in all that. But by design also, when we see today, for the past 10 years, how history is being erased by liberal types who are offended at everything and contribute nothing. And they think that their good deed is making things better, it's making things worse. And because of everything being in the age of decadence, people become very relaxed and take many things for granted. And I'm just going to give a quick example how we see people wasting food simply because, for example, it's the wrong order. They'll throw out all the good food. Meanwhile, there's people going hungry. Or there's something about whatever they bought they didn't like and that food gets thrown away. That is decadence at its finest. And these people don't deserve to eat if they can't respect food. But how can you expect people to respect food when they don't respect themselves or anyone else or anything else? But food is a good example because it's a basic necessity. And with this age of decadence, we see, for example, how people in nations have become very vulnerable to the point where you have liberal types who are inviting others into their homeland who don't share the same values, traditions, and social standards, for example, from the days of old, that had created their decadence. And these people are coming in, changing everything. Now, I'm not stating or implying anything negative about these other people, but there are some groups of these people who actually blatantly, I'm just trying to think how to say this, are not good. We have others who are fine. But really, I just want to focus on, we're at the point now where we see very harmful individuals coming to nations and literally destroying it from within. And all these truther and freedom types are pointing the fingers at governments. And yeah, they do play a part in this, but that's democracy. People have been socially engineered to scream about, oh, we want democracy, democracy. Democracy is 51% of the population can take away the rights of 49%. And when you look at this political structure of democracy, you have a perceived elected official supposedly representing the people, and perhaps when they're campaigning, their platform is, yes, this is what we're going to do and everything else, but nothing really ever seems to change because, one, none of these perceived leaders at any level are making any decisions on anything. They're being controlled. But with that said, there are some that are making not laws but policies and imposing it on people as laws, and that's them doing it. You have to excuse my guest here. I have a fly flying around as I'm recording. But anyway, so we have these perceived elected officials where they can imposing whatever nonsense that they want, because 51% or more, usually more, want that kind of system, and there's nothing to control that. I want to segue for a moment. What a lot of people don't realize is that governments were only ever to create and maintain infrastructures, not to micromanage. That's democracy. Now I'm going to contrast this with a republic, for example, where 99% of the population cannot take away the rights of 1%. This does not mean that it's a free-for-all, because people still have to coexist, get along, and build a civilization and maintain that civilization. But the difference is, in the republic, a government does not micromanage. They create and maintain the infrastructures. And really, the rest is up to the people to, as a descriptive, I'm trying to simplify this, to self-govern. So when we see, for example, as a descriptive, people who are very harmful, undesirable to a nation, who are physically causing harm, how truther and freedom types are, for example, talking about all these missing children and people. Everyone focuses on children because it's all emotion stuff, but people really don't seem to care as much about adults who are going missing at high rates. It's only the children. You gotta ask yourself why that is. And truther and freedom types are pointing the finger at those with generational commitment and a monopoly on violence and government officials and everything else. And I'm not stating or implying that there's some truth to this or not, but there's something else going on right in front of everyone's eyes when we're talking about, for example, bringing in people from other cultures that really conflict with a Western high trust society. I'll give you an example. When you talk about missing children, there are cultures that, I'm trying to wordcraft here for a reason, that will take children, even from their own countries, for religious practices, we'll say, and even consume them as part of that. Not just children, adults as well. And now they're all over the Western civilization. But no one has stopped to think, well, hang on a second. Yeah, there's a lot of people missing, children, whatever, and even people's pets, we'll say as a descriptive, going missing. And automatically it's elites, it's government people and all this stuff. But you have to ask yourself, what about all these other people bringing in these customs, for example, of taking human beings and animals from life and consuming them? This is a reality, because they're bringing these customs to the West. And perhaps no one's talking about it because, one, for the commoner, it's super scary, and two, for governing bodies, it's what do we do? And I'm going to segue for a moment. It's not just that, but they're literally turning the West into where they left. But the real threat is when it comes to human life and even animal life and what's really going on. We see a huge spike, and it does correlate with certain groups of people bringing their traditions with them. That is on the people for wanting the type of governance that they've been brainwashed. And again, this all ties in, especially in current times, with social media. And I've highlighted over the years, the real problem we have for at least 2-3 decades is we have omitted the rite of passage in society. And we see this on this type of thing on different levels. For example, at a university, somebody joins a frat house or something, and they have an initiation process, sometimes perhaps a little bit crazy, extreme, whatever, but after it's all done, they are now part of that group. Now, I'm not saying good or bad about some of these activities that they had to go through, but it's an example of a rite of passage. You earned the right. Now today, we don't have that. And so many young people are lost. Not only young people, but older people. So they're grasping onto something, a football team or something, trying to be part of something. But really there's nothing binding them to their own culture, their own land, their own country. Because all these things that brought people together with a common goal have been erased. And this is happening all around the world. And one of the biggest things we see right now is the trauma that people are still dealing with from the events that began in 2020. And these people are the most easily manipulated through various psyops. Social media is the problem here. People going into echo chambers, and even if somebody goes into a group, say with an open mind, and listening repeatedly over and over and over, all of a sudden they're sucked in, and they have this sense of belonging. And virtue signaling perhaps has replaced the rite of passage, because the more you virtue signal, whether it be about some liberal ideology or a conservative ideology, perhaps that virtue signaling is, I'm earning my right to be in this group. I'm spreading the word. But it's not just politics we see this. Religions and belief systems have the same type of thing for a very long time. And I've said religions and belief systems have little to nothing to do with the Most High, God, the Creator. We see the same type of thing. We've seen the same strategies with cults, with these social movements, whether it be social justice movements or the conservative type movements. I've mentioned in a previous video how we see the same type of psychosis with liberal types as now we're seeing with conservative types. And there's a little gap in the middle. And really you want to be in that middle. But you have to break away from everything else. Break away from the matrix and not be manipulated. And the best way to do that is not to be attached to anything. And I've talked about this type of thing in a video by not having or wanting to identify as anything, personally or professionally. But you have to want not to be attached. And that is key. Break away. And there's going to be, how should I say, some growing pains from that, withdrawals. I've challenged people to, for example, not watch TV, listen to music or anything for 30 days. Never heard of anyone actually trying it. But if you can do that, not just to break away, but it shows discipline, and it shows what you can do with the worldwide manipulation that's taking place. This civilization is going to fall, and fall hard, and fall faster than people could imagine. But I'm not saying this to fearmonger or anything, because all I've been saying for a long time is be prepared, overcome, adapt, and move forward. Survive. The people who are most scared are the ones who are trying to hang on to salvage this civilization. They're going to protest, they're going to march, they're going to do silly things like breaking the law and getting a $29,000 ticket. These people are the most scared, and everything that they're doing is irrational. Step back, take a break, look around, and think. Really, that's all I have to say at this time. Things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
In South Africa today, the practice of witchcraft, particularly in its most dangerous and destructive forms, is not just tolerated. In some circles, it is actively celebrated and defended, even as innocent children go missing and families are left shattered over and over. These real events are happening right now in our communities. It is one of the most overlooked patterns of tragedy by the South African media. On the other hand, politicians look the other way, and in some cases they are even speaking in defense of these practices. What were once respectable institutions of higher learning in South Africa have now been thoroughly transformed into indoctrination centers promoting African witchcraft in public lectures and scholarly publications as well. This is the direct result of the ANC's drive to decolonize South African universities as part of their transformation agenda, the African continent. Wages were among the highest in all of Africa, with wages of up to 300% higher than in any neighboring countries such as Mozambique and Malawi. The country's agricultural industry produced so much food that not only for itself, but for the entire continent, and it became known as the breadbasket of Africa. Furthermore, the country's infant mortality rate was among the lowest on the continent.
Now I have to find that fly. Where did that fly go? He made one too many mistakes in life.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.